It's a new year, and literary powerhouse Black Mountain Institute at UNLV is back with new free programs for everyone in Las Vegas. This season, BMI is bringing incredible writers to Las Vegas, including Iranian writer Manira Ravanpour, in conversation with one of my favorites, City of Asylum fellow Maryam Allah Amjadi at the Winchester Dondero Cultural Center on February 11th. BMI also hosts workshops, film screenings, book clubs, and other great literary programs. So visit blackmountaininstitute.org for more information. Almost everyone in Las Vegas knows someone affected by the devastating fires in Los Angeles. Our cities are so closely connected, and people have been migrating to Vegas from the City of Angels for years. So now, in the wake of the disaster, will we see even more Angelinos moving here? Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we talk with UNLV economist Nicholas Irwin about how the LA fires will impact the housing market in Las Vegas. Will we see the cost of housing go even further up? And when should we brace for all of it? It's Tuesday, January 21st. I'm David Figler, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Nicholas, the fires are still ongoing, of course, but the scale of the devastation so far has been astounding. So what do we know about how many people have been displaced and how many have lost their homes so far?
Well, David, thanks for having me. And it is the scale of that devastation is absolutely astronomical right now. We're still unsure of how many properties and how many people will be displaced, because even for people whose houses may have survived, their neighborhoods may be completely decimated. Yeah. The air quality and the quality of their neighborhood has decreased significantly since these fires, and some people may not feel comfortable moving back in until that cleanup process begins. And that cleanup process is going to be a long way off because we need to worry about stabilization as well of the soil.
Oh, for sure. I've never seen pictures like the pictures that are coming out of this area. I've seen forest fires before. I've seen, towns like the town of Paradise kind of getting wiped out, but this is just a different level. And, Nicholas, there's already a housing shortage in California, just like Nevada. So where are these people going to go?
That's a great question. We are already seeing some pushback from people who are entering that rental market. It's already a very heated rental market in Los Angeles, who are increasingly trying to outcompete each other for this limited supply of housing. And we're seeing a lot of some landlords that are really pushing those prices up, perhaps at a level that is, I would say, I'm a big believer in markets and how markets work, but perhaps they are, that price point now is a little bit above what the market would dictate.
Predatory or just taking advantage of the situation. That's horrible.
Some potential price gouging. And of course, that's illegal to do, especially during crises. But it's a big demand for a lot of these properties. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on everywhere in the greater Los Angeles area, all of Southern California. There'll be pressure into Orange County, probably down into San Diego. There'll be pressure up to Santa Barbara. And I would expect some pressure here into Las Vegas because we are so closely tied to our Southern California neighbors.
And whatever our flaws, Nicholas, we do seem to look very attractive to a lot of people, especially Californians, if time and history is any sort of tell on that.
We do. That low income tax and the shiny bright lights are always a big draw.
Yeah. Oh, the moths. I hear a lot about regulations in California. And one of the reasons that Nevada sort of touts itself as being a better place is that we don't have the same kind of regulations and tenant protections and all those sort of things. But specifically about rebuilding in these, very fragile ecosystems, et cetera, how long will it take for California cities impacted by this to rebuild? What does rebuilding even look like at this point?
That's a great question. We don't know what rebuilding looks like because we've seen in other areas that have had wildfires, it's rebuilding of houses, but we're talking about entire neighborhoods. We're talking about those third spaces that people can gather. We're talking about the restaurants, schools, and that's going to take a very, very long time. And the particular big issue here is we have some folks who, especially in that Altadena area, who probably not only lost a home, but perhaps their job as well and their kids' school. So those are the folks that are probably going to be most likely to be mobile and consider moving, sort of a fresh start. For when it comes to rebuilding, that's a great question because this presents a unique opportunity that perhaps LA County as a whole could figure out some ways to address their housing affordability issues, this housing crunch, and provide more units to the market than they otherwise have been in the past. But that will come with, replacing some of the single family homes with some denser development. And I don't know the local appetite for something like that.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you. I mean, we are in a different time in history than when Los Angeles was developed, with a chance to start all over, knowing what we know about housing affordability, even homelessness, what's now being touted as housing accessibility. If we might see that more dense building, and if California is suited to do that, especially with the possibility of tariffs and stuff coming in. I mean, there's a lot of factors. What do you think is going to happen from your perspective as an economist with the rebuilding of these places like Altadena and Pacific Palisades, et cetera?
I think it's going to take a long time, and I think there's probably going to be an ordering where the people that have the money are probably going to be able to be rebuilt first. So those, the middle income groups that are living in the Altadena or perhaps a house in Palisades, it's going to take a lot longer for them to rebuild.
Yeah.
I looked on with some amount of, I guess, pride or happiness, maybe is a better way to describe it, that LA County has announced that they're going to attempt to waive CEQA, some of the environmental regulations to allow the rebuilding to take place at a quicker pace. Mm-hmm. That's a big barrier to building affordable housing, to build all types of housing and anything in California. And it's a big contributor to why house prices are so high there. Any way you can eliminate red tape to allow people to rebuild more quickly is ideal. But we're at a unique point where the folks in LA could consider how can we build in a way that addresses housing affordability, but also builds resiliency for future wildfires. If there's one thing we've learned from previous wildfires, the Camp Fire is a great example. Wildfires tend to reoccur. Once that they won't occur in the short term, but in that medium, longer term, as that fuel load gets rebuilt, those fires will come back. I mean, the Camp Fire has devastated the city twice, that town twice in Northern California within about a 10-year span.
Yeah.
We could see there's a potential way to build some resiliency into how we consider constructing and how we build our houses in this WUI interface, that wildland-urban interface.
Now, you mentioned CEQA and these environmental protections. There's no doubt that there's a lot of pressure on Governor Newsom of California and other elected officials to do what they can to waive what they can. Are you concerned that there might be a likelihood that too many environmental protections could be waived here to the detriment of people living in those communities?
That's a great question. And this is a trade-off. There are going to be a lot of important trade-offs that we need to consider as a society because of this. Mm-hmm. This could be a trade-off. And there could be some concerns. But a lot of this place is stuff these are areas that have already been developed. So a lot of those environmental concerns are perhaps less important here. The particular issue with some of these environmental regulations and these reviews that have to be done is they can serve as a way for people who don't want the development to happen to block it. And especially if you take them to court, take the developer to court, they can cause a lot of added delays. Anytime you add delays, it just increases the cost. But how much of one we want versus the other, that's an important conversation that needs to be had. And I hope those conversations will be had, not only at the local level, but at the state level in California. And those are lessons that we can learn as well, because there are some barriers to us, what we can build to address our affordable housing issues in Southern Nevada that do come with, some trade-offs of relaxing some permitting. But as long as you're encouraging people to sort of obey the main spirit of the law, it's a complex trade-off.
Yeah, and we did hear from the governor recently in his State of the State address here in Nevada that he was going to make some efforts to cut some of the red tape to get some of these housing developments moving forward. And, I mentioned before, and it's pretty much a given, we just know that there is this migration from LA to Las Vegas. It's a long-standing pattern. What do you predict about how many people will move here from LA because of what is happening with these wildfires? And when do you think we'll see that happen?
That's a great question.
That's my third great question in a row, Nicholas. I'm feeling good about myself. Or you're making me feel good.
No, these are good questions. And, we see folks in California all the time. We see people who maybe haven't changed their license plates over. They're still rocking those California tags.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they've been our neighbors for going on years. It's one of those things where we probably won't be able to exactly pinpoint how big the influx was or when it occurred until we have several years of data moving forward. But on any given year, about 70% of our new, migrants, the people moving into Southern Nevada, are coming from Southern California. LA, San Bernardino, and Orange County are sort of the biggest counties where folks are coming from. So I imagine we'll see an uptick, especially as people want to wait out. If they don't want to deal with the headache of trying to find a rental home, and they want to wait out the process to get insurance paid out and figure out what their next steps are. This is an attractive location because it's a half day's drive to get back if you need to meet with folks. And if they have flexibility with their jobs that would allow them to move remote, I could see some folks moving in. And that's going to put pressure on local Nevada residents in that rental market.
Yeah, and I'm curious about that. And you're absolutely right. Even just temporary measures, we have friends who have come here from LA just kind of waiting as things sort of settle down, including a CityCast employee here in the great city of Las Vegas, enjoying what we can provide for them while they're waiting. And I am curious how from an economist standpoint, this could impact the Las Vegas housing market, both the rental market and the buyer's market, which is already kind of like up in the air.
Yeah, no, it's the impact.
You were going to say great question again, weren't you? I know.
I mean, they're good questions. They're really important questions to understand.
Yeah.
I wish everyone asked me these questions. I think if you want to think about two different markets here, the owner-occupier single family versus the rental market, I think the rental market will feel the biggest impact. I think they're going to feel the impact because the Lead Center for Real Estate, which I'm the research director, we released a little report last fall that showed that new migrants coming from out of state are about 15% wealthier than in-state residents.
Interesting.
And the folks from California are almost 33% wealthier.
Whoa.
Than in-state residents. And that's
that would explain why we see so many cash buy offers from these California folks and kind of beating out our locals.
That's very true. And that means, and this is data that we're using data that's lagged. It's IRS tax data that's lagged a couple of years back. So I would imagine that effect is probably even larger now. But you come in and you're generally wealthier based on what's shown on your tax return. You're better able to compete in that market. So you're going to have more money to pay for that rental property. And if some of them decide to stay, they're going to be have a little bit more liquid assets probably to compete in that housing market, put more down, pay more for the house than some of our local folks. Which is a tale as old as time. That happens a lot with people moving out of state. But there could be some pickup.
Do you plan your vacations based on whether you can speak the local language? With Babbel, language no longer has to be the barrier. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago with my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, so I just let her do all the talking, like all of it. I adored the city, and now I'm going to go back in a couple of months, but with my college roommates, who are a bunch of middle-aged men, none of us Spanish speakers. When I was younger, I might not have been bold enough to do that, but now I'm not anxious because Babbel has me covered. Thanks to Babbel, I know how to order a taxi, how to give directions, how to order in a restaurant, all the small and useful bits of language that make international travel easier. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations, especially the sort you need while traveling. Food, how to get places. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you actually need when communicating. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. So I hope I'll see you in Mexico in a couple of months. Or, as we say, espero verte en Mexico en un par de meses. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
We talk a lot on this podcast, and we've talked to you on this podcast before about the gap of affordable housing, or what's now also being called attainable housing, in our community, that Las Vegas has just not been faring well, that there is far more need for both housing and housing that people can get into.
Yeah.
Is this going to make it even worse?
I love that idea of attainable housing because I think it better explains the ideas behind affordable housing. Because affordable housing is housing that's affordable to you based on your income or your household's income.
Right.
Attainable housing takes that one step further and asks, is that housing available? Because stuff may be affordable. You may be able to afford $1,500 a month in rent, but if there are no $1,500 a month rental units in the entire town, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So it may be affordable, but not attainable.
Yeah.
We want affordable housing. We want attainable housing. We want workforce housing for that middle group. Not the people that have high incomes coming from out of state. We're talking about our nurses. We're talking about our teachers. We're talking about folks like that who are competing in that middle of that market around $400,000 to $550,000 for a house, and not a lot of those houses are being built. And those houses, when they're on the market, they go pretty quick. And that's something that we've seen.
And rental units too. I mean, I want my baristas to be in secure living situations nearby where they work, so they can, have a good life. It seems like it's getting harder in Las Vegas. I don't know. I guess back to that question though, is the potential impact from these wildfires and what I'm hearing as a new term to me, climate refugees. Is that going to make it harder for all of the working people of Las Vegas to get into appropriate housing?
It could contribite to it. And I think what you're talking about, the idea of housing becomes so unaffordable, when in recent memory, you could afford a house on a single person in that household working a full-time job, and in the not too distant past. We're talking, pre-2005. That's not that long ago for a lot of folks in town who've been here for a while, where it was affordable. Las Vegas was a very affordable place. That's because we built a lot of houses. So we had a huge supply, and our ability to supply those units has dried up for a variety of reasons, or slowed down, we'll say. But that demand keeps coming. More and more people come here. So as more and more people come here, it's going to make it more difficult. And it's interesting you say the idea of climate refugees, because I had always been thought that places like Asheville, North Carolina would be a good place for climate refugees, because it's far enough inland that it should never be impacted by hurricanes.
And yet,
and yet, with an unpredictable climate and storms that are becoming, stronger, and for us, a prolonged drought, at least I think wildfires, perhaps not as big a concern, but, we do always have our water issues we're always monitoring, and more people in town puts more pressure on that. And that's just going to eventually come to the point where we're going to have to consider some trade-offs of how we're building to make sure we're protecting our scarce water for the future.
Nicholas, apart from the housing policies that are being touted by both the governor and maybe slightly different from the Democrat-led legislature, which may or may not make it through, what else should Nevada or Las Vegas specifically be doing to prepare for this potential influx of these new folks? Put on your economist's goggles and spread them out to holistic and wide. What kind of immediate things should we be thinking about or doing in our community?
I think an interesting thing that we should probably be thinking about is, if we do have a lot of folks coming in, especially if they're bringing their families with them as well, we could see in some of these areas that have the more affordable housing, we could see an influx of students into some of these schools, which could lead to some overcrowding issues. I know overcrowding is an issue in some of the elementary schools across the county. Some are impacted much more by it than others. And this could necessitate a redrawing of attendance boundaries for people. And that could be next year, your neighborhood school you may be rezoned for, just because we've had such a big influx of folks.
Great. So more trauma for the Clark County School District, more pressure.
That's exactly what it needs as it searches for a new leader. But
so what I'm hearing is that because of this specific natural disaster, that the people involved with education policy down here in Las Vegas really need to be taken serious now with the potential of it becoming a really big issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is something that is something they can consider generally. You know, for example, I know if you have a neighborhood school where they're building a new apartment building next to it, you may be prepared for the influx of students, but you don't really know until they show up how many students in each grade. And that can lead to a lot of, pressures on the classroom and having the correct amount of teachers. I know my kids' school, they attend a public school in town. They had to find another kindergarten teacher at the last minute because they did not have enough kindergarten teachers. This would have been a year ago. They didn't have enough kindergarten teachers to accommodate what was their ideal class size. So they had to temporarily have larger classes. Yeah. And then once they were able to hire that extra teacher, that allowed them to then, split up class sizes as they could. But this school had the ability to do that. Not all schools may have the ability to find that teacher. So it could lead to some pressure. I think what could really impact us here, and this is unrelated necessarily to the influx of people, I would anticipate there's going to be a revisiting of things like homeowners insurance and pricing risk. And that's going to impact all of us as we start to consider these risks, especially in the face of a change in climate. Some of these risks of these big natural disasters probably need to be more adequately priced into things like homeowners insurance, perhaps auto insurance, because there were a lot of automobiles that were lost in the fires as well. Right. And usually what that means is that's probably going to mean higher premiums for everyone.
Wow. If they weren't high enough in Las Vegas because of all the issues that we already have. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Nicholas, I really appreciate your insight on this. I mean, this is something that came out of nowhere, even though a lot of people said it was predictable. But here we are. Anything else we didn't talk about today that should be a part of this conversation?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, and this is, I'm going to have to give credit to my colleague, Sean McCoy, who did this research. We sort of think of wildfires as being something that doesn't impact us as much in Southern Nevada. We have had some in the recent past on Mount Charleston. But if you look at the amount of land burned in the past 40 years across the U.S., in California, that's over 24.9% of California has experienced a wildfire in the past 40 years. Now, you may think Nevada is going to be very different, but we're 18.4% of the state's burned.
Oh,
and so
that is surprising.
That is a surprising number. We've had a lot of wildfires, but the difference between us and California is these wildfires occur in very rural areas, sure. Mostly in the north of the state, and they're less likely to impact our population as they do in California. But we still have these same risks. Just like one of my favorite stats is, we're the third most earthquake-prone state in the U.S.
Yeah, people don't realize. I mean, if you lived here long enough, you get it. You understand.
Exactly.
And this is also like one of my personal worries about, taking over so much federal land is that you also have to be stewarding it for things like wildfire prevention. And, hopefully the state will be mindful that if we do get more federal land quicker, that we are also equipped and financed to take care of those lands before they get developed, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're seeing what happens when that infrastructure is spread too thin with the magnitude of the damage of some of the fires from the LA County Fire and all the associated fire departments, just, being unable to have the manpower and the water and the equipment to fight the fire that is occurring in so many spots and is burning so intensely. No system can build up to that. But there are a lot of important things California could have done. I'm a big proponent of burying power lines as best you can. Just you're preventing sources of ignition. A lot of these really damaging fires in California have occurred from these like power lines that have gone down. And any way you can mitigate any amount of risk is always a positive thing.
Yeah, a lot of lessons to be learned. UNLV economist Nicholas Irwin, thanks for joining us again on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thank you for having me. Great talking with you.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend. You can also rate our show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky. Yeah,
and it's
no doubt.
it's absolutely depressing. And it's hopefully we'll learn a lesson, but I'm so deeply skeptical that we'll learn any lessons.
Jaded economist. Go figure.